Welcome, everyone, to Libraries in Response, session 125. My name is Don Means. I am your host here. And I'm going to share and play the welcome, April the 10th already. This year is moving fast. And maybe for some of us, it's moving slowly. There are just so many challenges going on. We'll touch on some of those as we do. Libraries in Response is a co-production of Gigabit Libraries Network, where I'm the director, and the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, based in The Hague, IFLA, our longtime partner in this 5-year running webcast series and in other equity projects. I can say it, equity, yeah. And at the helm is Stephen Weiber, the head of public policy for IFLA. And I think he's running multiple meetings right now. These are our panelists. We'll get to our session here momentarily. Linda, Rebecca, Juan, thank you so much for joining us today and talking about creativity and AI in the library. This is our kind of our go-to image. This represents what we think Libraries in Response is about. How do libraries support the needs of their communities, or in the aggregate, the entire world, against the onslaught of these crises? We started 5 years ago in response to the pandemic. It was just declared in March of 2020, and we were all going, what? And so we started convening, and it just rolled on from there. And it was one crisis after another. There was a social crisis, the Floyd murder, and then the economic crisis from the pandemic, and then the political crisis, and of course the pervasive climate crisis. And now we have war, which has hit the scene again. We didn't really think of that as a personal crisis, but if we embrace all sort of political strife, we're in that. And then, of course, AI is a crisis. I mean, it may not fit the same profile as climate or pandemic, but in a way, it shares a lot of the same attributes. It's global, it's pervasive, and it heavily impactful on civilization. So we envision a world surrounded by 400,000 public libraries, kind of bracing it from behind as it tries to deal with. This was awarded to us by the cartoonist. He's the political cartoonist for The Economist magazine, Cal, and we think the guy is just brilliant. We want to thank our sponsors and supporters, the New Jersey, Texas, and Washington state libraries, who are supporting us and have been longtime collaborators and partners, along with Mission Telecom, a commercial company, which has stepped up this year as well. It really makes these possible. And it's especially gratifying that these state agencies are helping, given they're under such strain themselves. And the reason, of course, is, as I'm sure we're all aware, is the beheading of the Institute for Museum and Library Services, IMLS, which has played a really key role. Certainly for us, these are a list of our projects where we've been the principal investigator over the past number of years. These are all, except for Libraries in Response, these are all really proof of concept projects, kind of emerging technology and then applications for those technologies, mostly wireless infrastructure projects. And I was just thinking today, who else would step forward to fund such a thing? Foundations really are not interested in infrastructure. They may be interested in it, but that's not what they do. They identify with very highly targeted specific things like a disease or a social condition, but the general services platform that we all rely on it just doesn't fit the profile. So IMLS it's not a big agency. It's under $300 million a year, which is just a teeny tiny fraction of the federal budget. But they have done outstanding work, and a big part of what they do is support the state libraries. Like most of the funds for the state agency go through the state library agencies, which then are all different and they use it differently, but a large amount of that goes to support the needs of small and rural libraries, which lack the kind of resources, both time and skill levels that are found in the larger systems. But without these state libraries and without their support, these rural, especially rural libraries, but not only, would suffer and will and already are suffering mightily. We just got our letter of cancellation yesterday, though we'd finished the grant, but the thing was still open, so it triggered a letter. But these are going out all over, and so what to do about that is a really interesting and open question. This is from an article that I just saw this morning. Uh, I should post a link, but this is the quote that jumped out. This is by the Washington Secretary of State. The agency that oversees the state library in Washington is this Office of the Secretary of State. And this idea about the principle that an informed and educated citizen is a key to a free society. This is different than other kinds of services. This is absolutely essential to our democracy, and libraries stand for that, and they deliver on that. And so the total amount of money that goes to IMLS as a portion of the federal budget, like I say, is infinitesimal. Even within the state budgets, it's really small. The Washington state government budget is roughly $70 billion a year. Well, it's a reasonable sized state. It's a reasonable kind of a budget. The IMLS portion to the state library, which equals about a third, which is, of course, there's a huge impact on the budget there, is $4 million. So it's our view that the states are the last line here. That writing letters to the administration to restore these funds, or suing them for it, or all the rest of it, that all has to be done. But I wouldn't sit around waiting for it to work. And in the meantime, what's the response? Our position is that it just falls to the states, even if they're squeezed and pressed. It's just the way the country is built. The states are like the last line of defense, and so we're very gung-ho about the states, and we think that they have an opportunity to step up, and supplying $4 million out of a $70 billion budget to restore full state library funding seemed like a wise investment, a huge bang for a small buck. So enough of that. Well, for now anyway, because this is really topic A for all of us, is how do we deal with all this? But let's get to our panelists and our topic on AI creativity at the library. I want to welcome Linda and Rebecca and Juan to share their ideas and their experiences with us. And we'll ask them each to tell us how they came to this work, and a little bit about their background that they can share with us as we kick off. So welcome, Linda. Please take us out.
All right. Thank you, Don. Really excited to be here. We're going to introduce ourselves in our sort of library context, and then we'll introduce ourselves in the context of AI and creativity. So Linda Braun, I've been working with libraries for 40-ish years, and I've watched how libraries have grown and changed over that time. And I always tell the story. I was a librarian. I started out as a children's librarian. And I was a librarian who really believed that libraries were about books. It was before, 40 years ago, some of you know, was before computers, internet, etc. And one day we had in my Massachusetts suburban library an Apple IIe, and there were kids there who I never saw before. And they came in and they were so excited about Carmen Sandiego, Oregon Trail, all those games. And I said to myself, oh, maybe there's something more here to what we're about as a library than just, the physical objects, the stuff that we provide and the story times and things like that. And that changed my career and changed my life, because I then realized that this was about the community and who we're serving and how we're serving them. And so that whole, here I am as a children's librarian in 1980, thinking about children's books is what I wanted to do for my life. And here I am talking about AI creativity to a group of people who are from around the world and interested in similar kinds of things. So I'm really excited to be here for that. And I just also want to echo Don. We understand that this is a very difficult time for libraries and library staff, and we won't be really touching on that today, but you could think about how to bring a creative mindset to that. So Becky, I'm going to go next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Becky Mazur, and I have a similar story to Linda's. It was back when I was in high school, nerdy high school kid, and my high school librarian, for whatever reason, kind of picked me out and said, there's a computer in the library. I don't really know what to do with it. It's connected to this thing called the internet. You figure it out. And years later, I became a librarian. Linda was my professor in library school. I became a high school librarian and have always really centered people in my work and the interactions between humans and technology. So I went on to become a researcher, and the focus of much of my research is the way that humans and technology shape each other, and the way that we respond to these changes in our libraries and in our schools. Juan, I'll send it over to you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Juan Rubio, and I'm actually the principal of JR Learning Labs. And my story starts in Honduras. I actually was a programmer back in the days using COBOL in Honduras. I actually programmed the first ATMs in Honduras. Is my call to fame. Then I moved here to the States, and I started still working in technology as a business analyst, but I decided that the corporate world was not really for me, and move on to education. So I work on the intersection of learning, technology, and design. Always has social justice has been part of my work. Yes, so I work with a lot of cultural institutions like NYPL in New York City, the Brooklyn Museum, Carnegie Hall, and then I came to Seattle to work at the Seattle Public Library, and now I'm doing my own consulting. And then so AI links really well for me with my technology background, but also that aspect of learning that has always shaped my work.
Great. Thank you all. Linda?
Will share my screen. Thank you, Don. And we will now go to it. We're going to do another sort of introduction as our introduction to the idea of creativity in AI. And so what you see here is 3 images that we have created. Each of us separately have created in AI. Some of you I want to say hello to. I saw in the participants. I know some of you. Very happy to see you here. And at least one of you will have seen one of these images before. And so I'll talk about creativity and AI with the image I created, and then Juan and Becky will do the same. So the image I created is this one of the weather and faces on the top right. And I'm not someone who easily thinks visually. I wanted to create something that helped people to think about how they were feeling about certain activities we've been working on. And so I went to ChatGPT. Where does someone go? But I went to ChatGPT and I said, I've got this idea, create something. And I did all different kinds of things. It was like, I said, create some let's see emojis in a grid, or let's see this. And then finally I said, what would it look like to show emotions as weather? And I went through a few different iterations of that and came up with this one. Now, one of the most interesting things to me about this is the way this is received by different people thinking about creativity and AI, and some of the things we're going to be talking about this today. Is I use this different times, different places, asking people, tell us how you're feeling about what we've been talking about. And people, and the idea is you interpret this image to show your feeling. You could be feeling who knows what, but where you put your sticker is your interpretation of the image, your creative interpretation. Some institutions do not like it, will not do this activity because they think it's too, it's too abstract. It's not specific enough. And that says a lot about the creativity in that institution, right? And so being able to think a little bit broadly and a little bit abstractly is a huge part of the creativity we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to turn it over to Juan, who has the middle image.
Yes, so that middle image that you see in there on the bottom is I'm an oil painter, and it's I wanted to do something around the parable of the sower and the journey that Lauren or Amina has, right? And that chaotic feeling. So I use AI to help me think through composition, through some oil techniques, but I'm always using it not to substitute my creative process, because I bring a certain human aspect to it, which makes art and all creations really interesting. But rather, so in the bottom image, you see sort of like the idea that I was going for, and on the top, I wanted AI to help me, and this is ChatGPT before it got this really good image language model now. I wanted to just think a little bit about perspective, and I knew that I wanted to incorporate highways, so I wanted to just give me an idea of how that perspective was going to work. So I'm always negotiating with what are the things that I really want to incorporate into based on the feedback that I receive, and what are things that I really don't care about it or don't want to, because it just takes me away from the concept and the original idea that I have. So that's how I actually use it. I also use it for writing, and I also move through different tools where I can use ChatGPT, but I can use Midjourney again. So I move through different things in that creative process that I find really helpful. Becky.
So mine's real silly and much sillier than Linda's or Juan's. So you see down in the bottom there, the actual picture of my little office, which is very disappointing to me because it is in the real world and not in a storybook world where I always wanted to live. So the image that you see on the top is that original real image imported into ChatGPT and then exported by ChatGPT as if it were in the world of Beatrix Potter. And so I have that set as my computer desktop. And when I look at it, I can kind of imagine that I am hard at work in the world of Beatrix Potter.
have to unmute myself, which is after 5 years of doing this, it's the hardest thing for most people. Maybe just me, but I'm saying most people. I do want to say we will be talking about more than images. That's just we thought was a good visual way to get started. So we're in the welcome and introductions. We're going to talk about what is creativity, why this conversation about libraries, creativity, and AI is valuable. We're going to be looking at a specific framework, the 4 Ps, and asking you to think about a new lens for creativity. We'll talk about if AI is creative, or maybe it's us who are creative. Then we'll go back to put all the things together and have some time for, I think, for a final Q&A and conversation. And please add to the chat questions, etc. Don is going to be monitoring the chat, and we have lots of times for discussion. This is Becky, or this is Juan. Sorry, did that wrong. Unmute.
So when we think about creativity, it's needless to say, it's a rather complex process that we go through. So it's good to look at it from very different perspectives and question, what is something that is creative, right? And something that is creative don't necessarily, or something that is new, we always think that maybe new is creative, or it equals creativity. But if we think about, it might be new individually, it might be new for you, and it might be creative for you, right? But if you look at it in a broader sense, it might not be really new. Like when taking, for example, creative writing classes, I remember the teacher is like, you have to read, right? Because what happens is that you think that you have written the most greater story, and you realize that it actually has been written already. So it's good to think about creativity in this way that takes a little broader perspective, right? So what might be new for you, or what might be new for an institution, right? It might not necessarily be creative in that sense. So the distinction between new versus creative is really important to keep in mind as we continue this discussion.
And here on this slide, you see another quote that is really trying to emphasize the fact that creativity is not about someone sitting alone having a brilliant thought. That in fact, it is contextualized by our social and our cultural context, everything that's come before us. That even the most original ideas or quote unquote original ideas, are influenced by language, by traditions, by values, by tools, by cultural norms, all of these things. What we consider creative, in fact, is shaped by what society values, by what we're trying to solve, and by what is available to us to solve them. So it's to say it's a very complex construct. We say the word creativity, we all think we know what we're talking about, but it turns out to be very difficult to unpack and very bound to our sociocultural contexts. And yet, we'll go to the next slide and talk a little bit about, given how complicated it is, why is it that we even care about creativity? Why is this a topic that we do a whole webinar about? And at the base, it's because without creativity, I would say in libraries, in schools, but in the world, what we get is its opposite. We get conformity, we get stagnation and stultification. And that is just not what we want. It's not the thing that's going to help us respond, as Don says, to the problems that are flying from the world at us all the time. It's creativity that helps us get to new thinking ideas, new ways of thinking, new ideas, new ways to solve problems, new ways to make decisions, new ways to work together. And so we're all after creativity, and AI is a tool that can augment our human creative process and expand what is possible in ourselves and in our systems. And that's really what we're here today to talk about.
So what we want to propose during this conversation is to think of creativity with a new lens that involves creative people, creative product, process, and creative environments, right? When we think about creative people, we bring our own temperaments, our own thinking, but also our own historicity, right? Our backgrounds. And for example, and I mentioned that before, of like removing that human aspect. I was brought up in Honduras with a very Spanish grandmother, and she always appears in some way, not only, in my creative process and how I approach people, right? So bringing and taking into account that sort of capital that you have as a person and what makes you what you are right now is really important, and it should be supportive. And then the same thing about the creative product. What is it that is being created? And sometimes that creative product is not something tangible, right? I think that, for example, uh, you know, a learning experience is a product. That session that you have in there, something that you did with your community, right? A conversation that you led. It's part of that creative process, that creative product, and then the process, right? Like how did it happen? How did you went about? What methodologies you used to create these conversation, right? And then the environment, where does it take place? What kind of relationship exists between an institution as an environment and all of these things, the people, the product, and the process that are being used to create. So we want us to think throughout this conversation about those aspects, and just we're going to get deeper into it. If you missed the message that Linda put in the chat, we want you to engage in the chat and just see if you have an idea. So we wanted to hear from you as well of what is coming up for you.
Thanks, Juan. And so I wanted to say two things as I go into the ideas on this slide. One is, last summer, I took a class called AI for Creatives. It was an online class from the New School in New York City. If anyone has a chance to take a class like that, it was amazing. And I thought going in, oh, it's going to be all about intellectual property and copyright and all that stuff. I was so wrong. It was about things like the 4 Ps of creativity. It was about AI, but it was overlaying these ideas of what is it to be creative, which is what we're doing with you today. It blew my mind. The other thing I learned from that class is we don't have answers, right? We have lots of questions. We have lots of ideas. We are creative people in this room. And so we're not going to give you out of the box AI and creativity, but we're going to hopefully give you some ways to start thinking about how AI fits with your library, with your system, with yourself, and how creativity and AI overlap. So this is an overview of this idea of the 4 Ps of creativity. And you'll see, Don, I assume you'll send out the slides afterwards. And so you'll see that where it's from, and there's a link to the actual paper that it is. And the 4 Ps of creativity are person, process, product, and press. We have as a team, so if you read the 4 Ps of creativity, it will say press. We have added pressure, because as we've had these conversations, we've realized, like, press, what does that mean? Well, it really means pressure from the environment and systemic influences. So these 4 different pieces, which you see here, are really important as you think about creativity. And as we've had these, as we've been talking about this for months, probably, Juan and Becky and I, in different ways, and over the past few days, just finishing getting ready for this. Every time we have a conversation, some new creative, interesting idea comes up. And so when we're talking about this, you think about the person, like who are the people who bring creative mindsets to AI programs and services in libraries, to your systems, to your structures. People have to be a part of creativity. You can't do it with just AI. You have to have a person there to work with the AI. And people have to be, their mindsets have to be fostered so that they're able to work with AI creatively and to think creatively about the possibilities for AI in their system. And so then there's the process, which is the how, right? Like how are you creative? How are you using AI to be creative? What are the steps in creative thinking in order to build something, in order to think about something, in order to be a part of the AI creativity universe? So there's a process that is required. And then there's product, right? So what comes from it? And this is tangible outcomes, but I would say they don't have to be tangible in the way we often think of. So if you've used AI, sometimes you have a report or a letter or a script or something that can come out of it, but you can also come out of it with ideas. A product could be an idea. It could be an idea for space. Like I'm using AI all the time to think about how things are developed and what might come of something. And so it doesn't have to be tangible in the same way. It could be policies, all different kinds of things. And then the press is the pressure. So the environment that creativity takes place in. So earlier on, when I talked about the image, one of the reasons I said, some libraries that I work with don't want to use that image in different facilitation activities we do. And that, to me, is a sign of an environment that's not open to creativity, that's not helping people to be creative and to think creatively. Because one of the things, if you read the 4 Ps and many other kinds of research on creativity, you'll find out that, the lived experience, the background of people, as Juan was talking about, and what the environment someone is working or living in has a direct influence on how creative someone can be. So we just wanted to have a little conversation here. One of the things I'd like to do is ask Juan and Becky, what does this mean to you? And then all of you add to the chat. What is this idea of person, process, product, and pressure? Juan, what do you think of when you think of the 4 Ps?
Yeah, right. Like if you think of something, like I'm thinking about something that I've done at the library, at Seattle Public Library, for example. I was like, I got a grant to create resources for mental health support, from IMLS. So I'm totally also sad that what's happening to them. But yeah, so when I think about that, right, like it's like I always think about these sort of like ecosystems where creation is happening, right? And especially in organizations like libraries where we are connecting with community. So who are the people in that space and what are they bringing with them, right? To that and how that influence the process that we are engaging with, and also how the process is shifting and moving, right? Like sometimes I come with a plan, but I might have to adapt it, and that it's based on some feedback I get from people, right? And how also that uh, product, it is not only what we're creating in terms of like resources, for example, but it's also what we're doing in that moment with the teens, with the librarians, right? For me, that's part of also a product because I'm thinking about the methods I'm using. I'm thinking about how I'm going to actually iterate on what is happening. And then also the environment is big for me because I think, and we always work with constraints, and especially at libraries that sometimes can be very rigid, right? Because there's so many policies and procedures, but also how do you then manage to continue producing and being creative within those aspects? So I like to think about all of those things working together.
Becky, thoughts?
I'm just sitting with what you both are saying and with what I saw come through the chat. I don't think I have any brilliant thoughts about this right now, other than just to say that this, as soon as you start thinking about this, I think your mind gets all in a tangle because of how interconnected all of these pieces really are. But if I zoom out and I can sort of think in these categories, it does start to help me think, ask the questions, especially as a leader, if I'm leading an organization, how is creativity flourishing or not in my organization? And where can I map that creativity to? So that's what I'm sitting with.
Thanks to you both.
Becky, can I
Oh, go ahead.
offer
Go ahead,
a
John.
question? Kind of going back to the idea of the difference between new and creative. We're getting things out of AI. We ask them for stuff and it gives us stuff. Some of it seems new. Some of it may seem creative. How would you parse that? Do you think it's capable of creative ideas, or just new ideas, or not really any ideas?
Well done. Thank you for that tee up, because that is, in fact,
Wait, hold on. Keep going, Becky. I just got the wrong slide. There we go.
that's where we're going next. So that was perfect. And we think that the question of is AI creative in and of itself is probably one for the philosophers. But we have done some thinking about that, and we have some sense to bring you all today. So let's think about AI as an individual entity, and that's why we've put it here in the person bin. And here we say, without going deeply into the mechanisms by which AI works, we're not going to do that today, but AI certainly can mimic what we think about as creativity. But currently, AI lacks what we call human cognition and intuition. So it's a very, very good mimic. It is a very sophisticated kind of autocomplete built on massive data sets. It is math. And math can certainly be very creative. But the way we think about AI, we think of it more as a mimic of creativity. When we think about AI and process, so what is the process that's happening when we're working with AI? We think of it as an interaction between human and algorithm. And there can be some real creativity that goes into that process. We think that creativity comes primarily from the human side. And here we're starting to think about, how does a human get really good at creative uses of AI? And that is its own huge field, but it is emerging and it is powerful and it is very exciting. I said to someone yesterday, I've just come from a trip. I'm a little jet lagged and I've been in a lot of airports lately. And I said, you know that feeling how you're
I didn't realize till the very beginning the state library we're actually paying for some of these.
Sharon,
these
Sharon, we can hear you.
Webinars that started during the pandemic that they've been doing weekly for 5 years.
Oh, sorry. So anyway, I was saying,
yeah, he's the one.
Wait, Don, can you mute Sharon?
I can't, but I'll try.
Oh,
Okay.
I think we're all. Oh no.
No, I can still see here.
Okay.
Sorry, I just clicked by mistake.
Stephen,
Sharon.
can you mute Sharon? Sharon, can you hear us?
Well, he actually did talk. There's like, wait, let's get back to the thing. So are they
Rarely have this problem.
All right, I think we're
creativity, which and two of the people
I think, Dawn, I think if you click on the three dots up on
And the
her name, you
participants,
might
maybe?
have the mute
she was
button
gonna do
there.
the facilitation.
I don't see it.
So yeah, I mean,
On her
I've been trying to
name,
do
and
other
then there are
things.
like three blue
I'm just,
dots.
Yeah, I see
let's
that.
see what
I've got
I see.
chat, replace pin, and hide non-video participant.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I don't.
I think
Right.
this is
All right.
Stephen.
I think
We'll
we're good now.
go forward. I'll see if I can raise Stephen.
Or
Okay.
maybe chat
Yep,
her.
she muted.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. I don't remember what I was saying. I'm going to move on to product.
Sorry.
No, it happens. It's the fun of webinars. That, of course, product is what we mostly think about when we're talking about AI, that we are able to use it to create things, to work together with humans through a process. And there's a whole spectrum of how creative that process can be, to create outputs, products, and those can be anything. We showed you some pictures at the beginning, but of course also policies, reports. You can use them to design space. You can use them to create customized chatbots, and we see many libraries doing that right now for different things. And of course, when we think about AI related to this idea of environment or pressure, AI has an environment of its own. It has laws and rules and policies of its own. Some of those come from their training sets, and some of them come from the way that they are then trained to use those data sets by the humans that program them. And none of us are really privy to what those are. We can make guesses and we can read about it, but certainly there is an environment, there is a sort of sociocultural environment that is in AI, is baked into AI itself. And so as we start to use AI and try to use it to enhance our own human creativity, that's one of the things that we have to be a little bit cognizant of about the machines themselves. So is AI creative? Not really sure how we can quite answer that yet. I will land on no right now, but I do think that as humans, we can be more or less creative about the way that we use it. And what I was gonna say was, I'm at the airport walking along, tired, schlepping my bags, and then I step on that moving sidewalk. And to me, when I'm really creative with AI, that is the feeling. It's like I'm still moving along, I'm doing my work, but I've just got this boost. And when I can do this well creatively with AI, that's how I'm thinking about it right now.
Okay, if I could kind of offer an example where I don't know whether it's creative or new, but often people will come up with what might be new ideas, maybe creative ideas, by taking two old ideas and putting them together that had never been done before. Now, AI is capable of doing that kind of thing. It's not inventing anything. It's just matching a couple of existing ideas together in a new way. And that creates something, does it or does it not?
Don, I'm going to say creating something is not the same as being creative. I've had that conversation with different AI tools, because when I started like talking to AI about creativity, it was always about creating. And I don't think all creating is creative, right?
Mhm.
So I think there's those that like there it depends on what's creative, whether what's created, whether it is creative. It is, as we said, it is so complicated when you start thinking about this. But that framework, I think, is really helpful, because if you think, what is it creative, by going through that person, process, product, pressure, it can help you to start to think, is this creative or is just something I created, right? Like, I don't know, that there's a difference there. And it's every time I type that into one of the AI tools, it says something like, that is a very interesting, nuanced idea, right? Because you know how it tells you you are awesome. So I always find that interesting. Juan, what do you think about this idea of creating something and creativity?
Yeah, it's a big question, right? Like, I think For me, I'm always interested in bringing my own sense to my experience, right? And one of the biggest advice that I have for people is like to get the response from AI, but really read through it and see how is it actually helping you to realize the original idea that you had, right? So, and then just to be careful about, because I can just say, you know, do this for me, right? Which is going to be very different than help me to do this. You know, it's very different. So I think we have to be careful in substituting the creative process and handing it to AI versus maintaining the ownership of your creative process and having it being augmented by AI, right? Some of my call to actions these days is also, and this is from conversations we had with Linda and Becky, is to embrace the cyborg, you know, but embracing the cyborg not only from human to machine, but in terms of like that Donna Haraway, the Cyborg Manifest, which talks about like looking at what's in between, right? Not looking at something as this or that, black and white, but looking more at the I think the Luz calls it, right? The virtuality, what's happening in between these zero and ones, you know, so moving away from the binary thing. Uh, so it's a lot of work. For me, that's it, right? Like yesterday, you know, I use it also for coding. I use AI for coding. Yesterday, I was debugging something, and then it was like telling me to create all of these programs, you know, and I'm like, I could just click a button and it would have created them for me. But after reading, it's like, wait a minute, those programs are already there, you know. So just very being careful about when you handle things to AI and when you control it yourself.
And Juan, what you just said is it could have created it for me, but that wasn't creative, right? That was just taking all your ideas and what you were feeding it. Being creative is coming up with that new way of thinking or new idea, as opposed to just taking something and molding it into something else. I think. Are there other questions?
That's I think it kind of sets up another sort of a bifurcation of this conversation, which is that as Becky pointed out, on one level, you know, there's this philosophical aspect of it, this existential, epistemological aspect of it, which we tend to flow towards just because we do. But then what we found in these sessions is that librarians are extremely focused on practical applications uh, of tools and ideas and so forth, and they may relate to each other, but at the same time, they don't have to, I think. Is that true?
Relate, you mean
Practical without really understanding it?
to understand AI, you mean to in order to use it?
Yeah, in a word.
Yeah, I think it will be much better. Like when you have a tool and you really understand, and then libraries have been champions of information literacy, right? And information science. And I think that bringing that understanding of how information it's obtained, processed, etc., is really key. So the more, for me, the more I've always been an advocate of like technology fluency, right? So the more you understand the technology behind, and you don't want to go, you don't have to go deeper to understand neural networks and deep learning and all of that. But the more you have a basic understanding of what is happening behind, I think the better and more responsible use you will make, right? And I also, when we talk about like we're talking about person, I think bringing that And libraries also have been championing ethical use, right, of technology also. What is that ethical use of technology? Am I going to claim that something that AI created or did, it's my own or not, right? So this is like what you bring. And so libraries can also, the other thing is about copyright, right? Like what is copyrightable? And libraries have been really at the forefront of making us understand, right, a little bit about that. For me, that copyright understanding, or like what is copyrightable and what's not, is also something that libraries can do to inform the public or people on how to use AI ethically and responsible.
That's great.
And Don, the other thing I'd say about that idea of practice, and people in this room who know me know, I struggle a lot when the focus is let's go straight to how we can use it and instead of like, how can we creatively think about what we're trying to achieve? Because the way that I know Sharon and Jen here from New Jersey, like what they're trying to achieve for their communities is different than what Juan was trying to achieve at Seattle Public Library, right? And so to say, let's just learn how to use it doesn't really bring in that lens of who are we trying to serve, why, and how. So I think for me, one of the things I love about the creativity piece is that it does ask library staff to be creative when they're thinking about the use of anything, but here we're talking about AI, right? And then how do we start to think about how do we use AI to serve our communities and in a way that is creative, with open mindsets as a person, with processes, with systems and structures that help us to do that. And so I think it's I'm going to say it again, it's complicated, but there's no one answer. So when someone says, I just want to learn how to use it, well, yeah, but how are you going to tie that to what is happening in your community?
Fascinating. Very, very good. We're part of a project called SLATE. It's the State Libraries and AI Technologies Project. Just a year ago, it was a temporary project. But this is one of the topics that kind of came up. We were talking about what it is and what it means and all that. And one of the librarian members of the group, a local librarian, small library in Texas, said, a lot of this has been about the 3,000-foot level about AI. I'm interested in what I can do with it. And it got me thinking, yes, indeed. So we then started doing some workshops on how to use AI and extracting data from databases, how to write letters, all these applications that you don't really have to understand, the meaning of AI to be able to use it. And so I think these are all valid. As you were saying in the beginning, this is such a large field. It is an environment for thinking and creating. So,
And it's not either or, right? It's not binary.
right.
And not to say Becky and I are part of a project in California where we created modules to help people to learn how to use AI, and it's very practical. There's some abstract stuff in there, theoretical things, but it's pretty practical. So I can't say that never.
Do you have any sense of the public demand for learning about AI at the library?
I'd be curious what people in the room are hearing about that or seeing about that. Is there public demand for learning about AI? I see it, and we have this slide. I'm going to go to our last slide because I'm going to show you, actually, it's not the last slide. It's this one, is that I see it in different ways. I see there's interest, but I also see that libraries sometimes struggle with how to think creatively about how to foster and support that interest. So on this slide, we don't have time. You'll see it when Don sends out the slides. Is we were breaking down how these things happen and how the 4 Ps play into different things in libraries. And like, what if, and I have seen this, what if user comes in and says, hey, I'd love to learn this thing about AI and use it this way. And if the staff isn't, if this environment, the pressure isn't there to support that, then that becomes challenging. Because what I've seen, and I'm not anti-library staff, any of that, but I've seen this box of these are the things we can teach people about AI, where it's not, it's almost like the makerspace idea, like AI and makerspaces have to be integrated in order to get to some of those larger thinking, for sure.
Great. It seems a natural. I'm just curious if people are making the association. What is AI? Oh, well, I'll ask the library, the information people. They should know something.
Mhm. That's great. People did put stuff in.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Well, it should be a rising area of interest and need, and a natural for librarians to really become conversant, if not
Mhm.
expert, in what this does and means and its impact.
Yes, and I think they're in the position of not only becoming experts, or maybe going away from the idea that we are experts, but rather mentors. And really, I know I've written about this. It's like more about like really learning of what communities want to make of AI. What are the uses that the community, and I mean community as everyone, what is it that we need it for, right? Because my uses of AI are very different to somebody else's, and like how can we then support the use in AI in a ways that really connect to the lives of people, right? And then we don't come from a point where we know, I guess, right, like that we know what people need and they should do it, but rather listening to them, right? And it connects to like we need to actually listen to AI, right? And examine to AI. And I think the same thing, we need to really listen to the people that we interact and we're serving.
Great point, Juan. More a guide than an expert, maybe not the best choice of terms. And a trusted source. This is, to us, the trust in general is declining. People don't know who to ask, who to believe, and libraries just by default are rising up as a trusted source. And this is really important right now, and that it's an opportunity for librarians to use that to provide that, but also to speculate on the impacts that AI is having on society in terms of their own communities. So what changes will it have? I mean, how is it changing jobs and e-government, and it goes on and on and on. And understanding that, experimenting with that as a makerspace, I think it's brilliant. Sounds like it makes sense. I did want to make one note that we don't really send out the slides.
Oh,
So you can put an email address in there that people can ask
okay.
for a slide. We do record and post the recording, so people will go back through and see the slides on the video, but we don't mail them out.
All right. Well, there you go. That answered that. So, Juan and Becky, will you put your email addresses in, and I will put mine in. And Juan, thank you for posting that article. It's a really great article, and it goes along with what Juan was just talking about. And then, Becky, do you want to follow up? And then I know we're at time, but with Ellis's question.
By the way, it's okay. This is not a TV show. We can run over a little bit if
We don't have a commercial break. We have to
have a
stop.
commercial break. So we won't go too long, but we don't have to
Okay.
cut it off exactly. So.
Okay. Go ahead, Becky.
Yeah, I did respond in the chat, actually. There is
Cool.
a ton of concern about this. I mean, I was at our educational research conference last spring, and talking to some colleagues who said, all of a sudden there's these citations popping up with my name attached. And I didn't write these things, but citations are being created left and right, often without people knowing it. I think that's probably less of a problem now than it was last spring, although I could be wrong. But it's a totally different webinar. It's a whole can of worms. And but what your question really does do, I think, is ground us in how critical it is for information professionals to have a really strong grasp of not only what AI is, but to some extent how it works and why it may be generating some content that becomes misinformation or disinformation. And I think that for even for librarians who are quite reluctant about using AI itself, and certainly there are many of them out there, understanding sort of the functions of AI, what it means for the information landscape and the way it is reconstituting the information landscape is a huge topic.
Indeed.
Great. Any other questions for us?
How about
Or
we
each
go
other?
around for closing statements?
From each of us, Juan?
Yeah.
Don?
Sum it all up for us.
All right, I'll go first since that's probably the fair thing to do. For me, the summing up here is, I think it's interesting what Alice, I think it's Alice just wrote in the chat, is that it is, people are fearful and wondering like what the impacts are, which are 100% valid. I think we have to take a creative mindset to using AI, right? That's what this is all about, is like, how can we think about how that we can leverage and harness what's possible with AI within the context of creativity to better serve our communities? Because I know that if we're not doing that, then we're not serving our communities. We're actually serving ourselves. So we really have to hone in on what are the ways that we can creatively think about this and then make sure that we use it Don, you said earlier, I can say that word equity, in order to provide equitable services to those that we are working with. Juan or Becky, who wants to go next?
Most of my work is, I think of it as creative, but I don't paint or draw or anything like that. I take big sets of data and try to make sense of them. And one of the best ways, creative ways that I have learned to use AI is to, and I'm very careful, of course, about anonymity and privacy and all of those things. But I ask AI about my data. I use AI to help me interrogate my data, to question my own assumptions, and to say, what are the nuances that we can pull out of this data that are in the that come from the minority reports, because that's something that we often really miss. So I think of it as a little bit. I think of it as creative, and I can do that because I live in an organization and environment that encourages me to do so. I have a policy landscape that supports my use of this, and not everyone does.
Yeah,
That's what's
when I,
excuse me.
sorry. When I think about creativity, I think about how it involves learning, that you always have to be learning, So, I had this art academy here in Seattle. The logo is like, an artist is not born, it's made, because I think you always have to practice your creative process, right? And it's not necessarily linked to artistic endeavors. When I design learning experiences, for example, I am always trying to incorporate what I have learned, how things have worked, and then find solutions, because creativity is also about finding and solving problems, and what are the solutions that will using that creative mind will help me arrive right at something that will answer in some way a question or ask more questions in the process. So for me, it's like about if you're interested in AI, my big advice is read as much as you can, learn as much as you can, and experiment as much as you can. Don't be afraid. Fear is such a big thing around technology, right? We're always very fearful. That's why kids are really good at it, right? And it's not that they're like smarter, it's just that they're not afraid of pushing a button. But as we get older, we're like, oh no. So remove that fear by exploring and experimenting, and then finding that creative sweet spot.
All of that says the opportunity to create a reputation for the library as the place to go to do all of that, to experiment, to learn, and develop. And that, to me, is a wonderful opportunity for libraries to seize. This has been great. I think we've really only scratched the surface of just the topics we've talked about, not to mention the ones we didn't even bring up. And so I would like to schedule a follow-up session here, maybe in a month or 2 or 3, and see where we can take this conversation. It's just been wonderful to have you all, and I want to thank you so much for your insights and your experience and your goodwill. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. And I want to then